Now, with those two harnesses disconnected from the back of the intake, I can go ahead and start with unbolting all the bolts around the perimeter. Like I said, they're 8mm. And there we have it. Now, once I pick up on this all the way, I'm going to take these rags and I'm going to transfer it to the ports on the cylinder heads themselves. And like I said, we're keeping the fuel line connected. We're just picking it up and gently sitting it off to the side. Now we go ahead and shove our rags down in the ports on the cylinder heads themselves. And with that, now we got access to the oil cooler assembly and also the oil pressure sensor if you're trying to remove that. So that we can get to that oil pressure sensor a little bit easier, what I want to do is go ahead and disconnect this oil temp sensor. Now the red piece right there is part of that two-stage lock that we usually see on different connectors. First thing I gotta do is lift up on it. Once I've released that, and press in on the side of the connector and slide it off. So there's that red piece right there. And the black square piece right there is actually the piece that I would be pressing on. That would be the primary lock, and of course the red's the secondary. Now if I move that out of the way, we got a little more room to see the actual oil pressure sending unit. Now luckily on that connector, it's just a single stage. They didn't put the red lock that slides side to side in there, so they put some thought into it. All you need to do is squeeze in on the connector and slide it back. Now we have access to the sensor itself. You can usually find your oil pressure sending unit sockets in two different lengths. You got your typical long one here that's probably about 2.5 inches long, and then you've got this one which is about 1.5 inches. I found that the 1.5 inches seems to work better in most cases, mainly because you've got real tight tolerances as far as clearance back here. You've got the hump back there at the back of the engine block before it meets the transmission. You've also got some wiring harnesses back there, and you've got that coolant hose. I found that the shorter one actually will slide up on here and seat enough onto the sensor that I can back it off. The best way to find out if the sensor socket is actually deep enough is to get your replacement sensor, slide in there, and make sure it makes contact with the brass portion of the sensor. Then you should be fine. Long ones will work, but like I said, it's more of a challenge to get to. If you can get a shorter one, that's probably going to be your best bet. All I got to do is get my 3/8 ratchet on here. Take it loose. There you have it. That's your old oil pressure sending unit. Just get your new one. New one should already have some kind of thread sealant already on there. You can see the red color right here, or the orange color. That's thread sealant. Make sure your new one does. If it does not, get you some thread sealant and make sure you put it around the outside threads before you reinstall it. And grab your replacement sensor and just start threading it in by hand. Once it gets snug, and you can put the socket back on it, and then we're actually going to torque the sensor in place. Now the specs on the torque is 15 foot-pounds. 15 foot-pounds on the oil pressure sending unit. And there you have it. Now it's just a matter of making sure you plug both connectors in, both for the oil pressure sensor and also for the oil temp sensor. Make sure you lock the secondary lock in place as well. Now before we go installing the upper intake, we need to go ahead and replace both the upper rubber seals and the lower ones as well. There's 6 uppers, 6 lowers. And I'm going to give you part numbers as well to go with those in case you want to buy the Mopar OEM versions. Now the upper intake gaskets are just rectangle in shape. You can use anything from a pick or a flat tip screwdriver to get them out. Just remove the old one, grab your new one, sit it in the groove, and then press down until it's firmly seated. And we'll move on to doing the other 5 remaining. Now we've got the upper intakes installed, what we're going to do is we're going to grab the assembly and rotate it upside down. Keep in mind we still got the fuel line hooked up that we never disconnected, so we didn't have to worry about any fuel getting anywhere or causing any kind of safety issues. So all we're going to do is pick it up and we're going to spin it. And there you go. Now we got access to the bottom of the intake, and these seals are held in exactly the same way. Just grab you a pick or flat tip screwdriver, work down in there and pull them off. You'll find that these are usually a lot more distorted than the uppers. The uppers almost look like they don't need to be replaced, but the lowers always seem to be flattened out, so definitely make sure you replace these. Now once again, your replacement one's just going to sit in the groove, push down, make sure it's fully seated, and just do the remaining ones, and then we'll flip it right side up. Take our rags out that we've got in the intake ports down there on the cylinder heads, and we'll go ahead and sit the intake in place. Now the last step before we put that intake on is we need to clean the surface that the intake mounts to the cylinder heads, where those gaskets are actually going to make contact. I start with first wiping them off by hand, get them nice and clean, and then what I like to do is go back with some brake clean on the rag, get a good wipe down. Being that it's rubber to the aluminum, you shouldn't have to use any kind of abrasive wheel, but if you find some kind of buildup that you think you can't get cleaned off well enough, so be it. But for the most part, a good wiping down with a rag coated in brake cleaner should be good enough. Now I'll go ahead and do the same to the other side, and then we should be ready to drop the intake in place. So after all this talk about prepping and replacing seals and everything else, we're finally at that point where we can just grab the lower intake, make sure that the seals are still in place one last time, and drop it down in here. Make sure there's no harnesses in the way, and we can hand start the bolts. Now what I'm going to do next is give you the sequence for tightening them down and the specs, so make sure you pay extra attention to that, play that over and over if you need to. So go ahead and follow that procedure, and afterwards I'll show you a few more things we need to do. Now this is going to be the sequence you need to follow when tightening down the lower intake to both cylinder heads. Now I'm going to give you an order that the bolts need to be snugged down. We're going to go by hand first, then afterwards we're going to come back and we're going to do the same sequence again, but we're going to use a torque wrench, and we're going to do it to a certain specification. Now for reference purposes, this is going to be the front of the engine. Now the bolts are going to be numbered as follows: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8. Follow that procedure when you're snugging it down by hand, and follow it again when you go back. And when you go back, you're going to go to 71 inch-pounds. 71 inch-pounds on the bolts for the perimeter holding the lower intake to both cylinder heads. Alright, so we've got the last bolt torqued down. Hopefully you followed the sequence I just showed you. Now what we're going to do is we're going to throw some rags over here real quick. We're only going to do this one more time. And the reason why is we're getting ready to attach the harnesses, so we're still going to have it open for a short period of time. Just grab the harnesses we took off earlier, position where they need to be. We're going to go ahead and plug in the coils. We're going to plug in the injectors, and if you still got some of these plastic fasteners for help routing it up against the valve cover, go ahead and seat them in place. That's your next step. Alright, everything's plugged in, everything's routed properly. One thing you don't want to forget, and a lot of people do, is we've got to put that foam pad back over here on the left side cylinder head. Now, we are ready for the intake to go on. Go ahead and remove the rags, grab your intake, sit it in place. Remember, you're going to guide it into the 2 brackets over here. I want those 2 studs to go in there, and then sit the intake down. Now, when you do that, I want to give you a sequence that you need to follow as far as tightening down the upper intake to the lower and a spec as well. So now we're ready for the upper intake. Remember, we're going to guide it over here to the side. Make sure they go into each one of the brackets. Then we're going to sit the intake down. Make sure all your vacuum hoses, anything electrical is out of the way. Now that it's firmly seated, we're going to start snugging down the bolts, but there's a particular order we need to follow. And number 1 is going to be the bolt furthest to the rear. So let's go ahead and start with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So follow that procedure and you shouldn't have any problems. Once again, do that hand tight and then follow back with a torque wrench. And the specifications on the torque is going to be 89 inch-pounds. 89 inch-pounds on all the bolts around the intake, the upper to the lower. So now that you've got that intake torque back down, the installation of everything as far as the electrical connectors, vacuum lines, the bracketry on the rear, the nuts in different places, is pretty much just going to be the opposite of how we took it off. So just follow the steps that you used when we removed everything and you shouldn't have any problems. So if you got any comments or suggestions about that 3.6 liter Pentastar oil pressure sending unit or anything Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, or Ram related, you can always email me at david@motorcitymechanic.com and I will try to get back to you in a timely manner. Once again, everybody, I appreciate all the comments and the feedback. Keep watching.